Most people assume royals never fly together for safety reasons, bodyguards, threats, that kind of logic. The real rule has nothing to do with any of that. It's not about danger in the moment. It's about making sure one bad flight can never wipe out an entire bloodline at once. And it kicks in at an oddly specific age, one that Prince George just crossed. The clearest account of this rule comes from someone who actually flew the plane. Graham Laurie, King Charles's former pilot, spoke about it on a Right Royal podcast back in 2023, describing exactly how it worked inside the family he served for years. "We flew all four. The Prince, the Princess, Prince William and Prince Harry, up until Prince William was 12 years old," he said, referring to Charles, Diana, and their two sons together on the same aircraft. After that, he had to have a separate aircraft, and we could only fly all four together when they were young with the written permission of Her Majesty, meaning Queen Elizabeth herself had to personally sign off if the family wanted an exception. Not a request. Not a suggestion passed along by an aide. Written permission from the monarch, every time the rule needed to be bent. That detail alone tells you how seriously this is treated inside the institution. It isn't a loose guideline quietly followed out of habit. It's something formal enough that even the reigning queen had to be looped in personally whenever it was set aside. And the number at the center of it, 12, is exactly why this story matters again right now. Prince George turned 13 just this week, which means he and his father, Prince William, heir and future heir standing side by side, have now technically crossed into the exact window where flying together stops being simple. According to the family's own precedent, this is roughly the point where separate planes start becoming the expectation, not the exception. It's worth being precise about why this rule exists at all, because it's easy to lump it in with the general blanket of royal security most people already picture: bodyguards, closed roads, snipers on rooftops. This isn't that. This is a much narrower, much older kind of precaution, built around one specific fear, that a single accident could take out more than one person standing in line for the throne at the same time. If William and George were ever on the same flight and something catastrophic happened, the line of succession wouldn't just lose a father. It could lose the next two monarchs in one event. That's the entire logic behind keeping direct heirs apart once they are old enough to matter to the succession in a serious way, not because either of them is more likely to be a target, but because the bloodline itself needs redundancy built into it, the same way any critical system does. It's also worth being clear about what this rule actually is today, because it's easy to make it sound more rigid than it really is. Modern reporting describes it as an unofficial protocol, not a written law, and current royal travel decisions are increasingly made case by case rather than by strict formula. There's no public confirmation that William and George are being kept apart on every flight starting the week George turned 13. What's true is that the family has a documented history of taking this specific age threshold seriously enough to require the monarch's personal sign-off to override it, and George has now reached the age where, historically, that conversation would start happening. Whether it's being applied exactly the same way 3 generations later is something the palace has never spelled out publicly, and probably never will. Here's the part that surprises most people the moment they hear it. Royals fly commercial constantly, and not just on the rare occasion when a private jet isn't available. For William and Kate specifically, it's been documented again and again across years of travel. In 2016, for their week-long tour of India, the couple flew British Airways from London straight to Mumbai. No private charter, no separate arrangement, just seats on a scheduled international flight. In 2020, for their first official tour of Ireland, they flew Aer Lingus. And in 2022, arriving in the United States for their first visit to the country since 2014, they stepped off a commercial flight at Boston Logan Airport, same as every other passenger walking off that plane that day. But the detail that genuinely catches people off guard is how far down that goes, all the way to budget airlines. In 2011, William and Kate flew Flybe and EasyJet to get to Scotland for Zara Tindall's wedding, the kind of no-frills booking millions of ordinary travelers make every week. Then in 2019, they did it again, this time bringing their 3 young children along on Flybe for a quick flight from Norwich to Aberdeen, heading up to visit Queen Elizabeth at Balmoral. What happened on that flight is almost more revealing than the choice of airline itself. Fellow passengers had no idea who they were sitting near until the family stood up to leave. One passenger later told The Sun, "Suddenly, Will, Kate, and the kids all got up and left. They weren't harassed by anyone at all as they got off the plane. They just seemed like a family traveling together, to be honest. No fanfare boarding. No one even noticing them get on. Just a family blending completely into a budget flight full of strangers." Official royal travel operates on a completely different system, and it's far more bureaucratic than most people picture. When it's genuinely government business, state visits, Overseas tours, high-security diplomatic trips, those flights are covered by the sovereign grant, the public funding mechanism that supports the monarchy's official duties. But that money doesn't get spent freely. Every state and overseas visit funded this way has to be determined by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and then formally approved by the Royal Visits Committee. There's a whole layer of governmental sign-off sitting behind something as simple-looking as a royal boarding a plane for an official trip. And the actual numbers, pulled straight from the royal family's own annual financial report, tell an interesting story on their own. In the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year, the single most expensive royal trip belonged to William, for his visit to Saudi Arabia in February 2026, which cost £130,000 in travel expenses. Compare that to King Charles and Queen Camilla's head of state visit to Canada in May 2025, which, according to the same report, cost the sovereign grant nothing at all, likely covered instead by the host nation, a common arrangement for formal state visits where the receiving country handles certain costs as part of hosting a head of state. Two official royal trips, both fully sanctioned and documented, landing on completely opposite ends of the cost spectrum. It's a reminder that even inside the most formal category of royal travel, the price tag depends entirely on the nature of the visit and who's footing the bill. Even the late Queen wasn't entirely exempt from the ordinary indignities of air travel, though what counted as ordinary for her came with its own quiet formality attached. Over the course of her reign, Elizabeth II flew more than 1 million air miles, and despite that staggering total, she rarely flew commercial. When she did, cabin crews weren't simply told to be polite and discreet. They were given actual written instructions on precisely how to care for her. In 2024, a former British Airways VIP flight attendant's personal memorabilia went up for auction, and among the items were confidential instructions dated back to 1989, laying out exactly how the Queen and Prince Philip were to be treated on board. Auction house owner Charles Hanson described the documents as detailing things right down to which suites Her Majesty preferred at takeoff. The specifics were oddly intimate for something so procedural. Her fondness for velamints, a request for her own pillows brought from home rather than the standard airline ones, and martinis available on request. Perhaps the most telling instruction of all had nothing to do with food or comfort items. If the Queen happened to be asleep before landing, crew were instructed not to wake her under any circumstances. She was simply to be left in her bed until she woke on her own. It's a strange kind of contrast to sit with, a woman who held a nation's highest office, flying commercial only rarely, and even then, arriving with a level of individualized care most airline passengers will never come close to experiencing. And then there's the moment that undercuts almost everything formal about royal travel in one simple image. In 2014, Prince William flew from London to Memphis for the wedding of his close friend Guy Pelly, and along the way, he had a layover at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. What happened during that layover wasn't secured, staged, or managed by any visible protocol at all. William sat in a private Swiss Air lounge, completely unbothered, and ordered pulled chicken nachos from Hub 51 along with chicken wings from RJ Grunt's, two ordinary airport-adjacent restaurants that anyone passing through that terminal could have eaten at that same day. People reported on it at the time precisely because of how unremarkable it was. No official statement. No advance notice. Just a future king, alone in an airport lounge, eating bar food between flights like anyone else killing time before a connection. It's a small detail, but it says something real about how differently royal travel can look depending entirely on the occasion. The same man who requires written permission from the monarch to sit on a plane next to his own son under certain circumstances can also, on a personal trip to a friend's wedding, disappear into an airport food court with nobody paying him any particular attention at all. So there it is, two versions of the same family, existing at the same time. One where an accident involving a single flight could theoretically alter the entire line of succession, serious enough that even the Queen herself had to sign off on any exception. And another where a future king eats airport nachos alone in Chicago, or a young family slips onto a budget flight to Scotland completely unnoticed until the moment they stand up to leave. William has lived on both sides of that divide his whole life. Now George is old enough to start living it too. Whether that means separate planes starting this year, or just a quiet conversation happening somewhere behind palace doors, the public will probably never actually find out. That's the strange part about this particular rule. It was built to protect a bloodline that will keep going whether anyone's watching or not.